Jenny, come on up here. Wow. I'm not done yet, but you got to hear her testimony. And she's a living example of what we're talking about.
Okay, so I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about what the Lord did for me this past week. Sorry, I've never spoken in a microphone before, but I had begun getting sick in the beginning of December, and I started to develop all of these symptoms from the beginning of December, like all the way through December, and the symptoms were just building up, and every day it was like I had a new symptom. And I became so sick that I was faint. I couldn't stand up for more than 5 minutes without falling over. I couldn't walk into my kitchen and make myself a meal. I couldn't eat anything. I was throwing up everything that I was eating. It had been like 2 weeks since I had been able to eat anything. The only thing that I was able to eat was yogurt and Jell-O. So like that's all that I could eat. And I started having hot sweats and cold sweats. I started getting a sore throat. I had ulcers like all over my throat on the inside. I couldn't swallow anything. I was running different fevers. They were jumping like up and down. And this was going on, and every time that I would stand up, the room would begin to spin. And it would just spin and spin, so I just had to sit back down. And those aren't the only symptoms. I mean, there was like more symptoms than that. So altogether, I probably had at least 13 to 15 symptoms that had accumulated over the period of a month. And so I ended up going to the emergency room at least like 4 times. And the 4th time, they just kept sending me home because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And so the 4th time that I went, finally the doctor came in and she said, I need to admit you into the hospital because your blood pressure is dangerously low and we can't actually let you go home. So they admitted me into the hospital and I was there for, I think, 3 nights and 4 days to be exact. And on the 4th day, finally the doctor came in and she was like, you have a disease. And she said, and it's incurable. And she said, and if you do everything the doctors tell you for the remainder of your life, then you won't die. And she said, but if you don't, she said, some people only live a year. Some people only live 3 years. And she said, and you can die. So she said, as long as you do what the doctors say, then you can stay alive. And when she said that to me, images of my children just started like going through my head. And I was just like, I can't leave my children on this earth without me because I love them so much and because they love me so much that if anything happened to me, you know, I just was imagining what their hearts would feel. And I have a 7-year-old little boy that I needed to get up and take care of. And it was really hard for me through December to take care of him because I was always in bed. I was in bed like all of December. And he was just like, Mommy, can you please get out of bed and play with me? And I was like, I want to, you know, but Mommy doesn't feel good. But when the doctor came in and gave me this diagnosis, I'm not going to lie, I was not walking in my spirit at that time. I was completely in my flesh. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I felt my heart cave in, and I felt it just drop to the floor. And I was in utter shock because I knew that this disease actually is a very rare disease, and it's not something that a lot of people have. And I just thought, what are the chances, you know, that this happens to me? And all these negative thoughts just started flooding through my head, and I was just like, this is my punishment. Like, God is punishing me. I was like, this must be my punishment because of my horrible past. Or, you know, this is, God is just using this to teach me a hard lesson, like tough love, like a military dad, like, no offense to people who have military dads, but I had a military dad. He was very kind of strict, but he was also very loving. But I just thought, you know, this is tough love. This is my punishment. You know, this is it. And, you know, God was fed up with me, and he just said, let her have it. You know, and that's the idea that I had. And I went home from the hospital with the darkest depression that I have ever felt in my entire life. I felt like I had just been given a death sentence. And the idea of having to rely on this medication and rely on these doctors for the rest of my life, they said, just for me to stay alive just didn't sit right in my heart. I just thought, that's no life. That's not a life to me. I thought that's a prison. And I felt like a slave to this diagnosis. And so it was Monday night that I had gotten home from the hospital, and I had cried myself to sleep that night. And I remember just crying out to God and just saying, God, I just need you to hug me. I just need you to hold me. I just need to feel your arms wrapped around me, and I just need to know that you're with me. And I came to the healing rooms the next morning, and I had gone back with Kimberly and Tim, and they had brought me in the back, and I just was like this depressing little girl that came in with this little cloud over my head, and they brought me in the back, and they just started talking to me about who Jesus is, and that he healed me on the cross, that by his stripes that I've been healed. And they stood in agreement with me for healing. And I received it, and I felt hopeful. I felt I felt the depression leave immediately because hope had come in. And I had come out here and sat for a little while. And so I had believed, I had heard what they had said, and I knew that what they were saying was in the Bible. But my experiences in life, I had been through so much suffering and so much grief in my life, and I had been through so much trauma that I allowed my circumstances to begin to tell me who Jesus was. And I lost sight of who he was, and the understanding of my heart of who he was had become darkened, and my heart had begun to become hard because of all the things that I had been through. And I was experiencing, I was remembering a time when I was a little girl, and I sat, in Bible study, and people told me about the miracles of Jesus. And I remember just sitting there with these big eyes. My eyes were wide open, and I was just in awe. And I was just like, what happened to that little girl? What happened to that faith? And I allowed the world, and I allowed all the pain that I had been through and all the rejection that I had been through, and even the things that I had done to myself to define who Jesus was. And I remember Kimberly telling me to go and to begin watching Andrew Womack. So I started watching Andrew Womack, and I think I watched 20 sermons in a matter of 2 days of just healing. And everything that he was saying was opposite of what I was believing Jesus to be, which is our healer. And it hit me. I always had heard the sermons. I had gone to church, and I'd heard the sermons repetitively over the last 37 years of my life, but I never had the knowledge here. Mm-hmm. And so it was in that moment that I realized that, these verses that Andrew was giving me about Jesus being our healer, that, Jesus told me that he cannot lie. That's right. And so when I realized, I put I was connecting all these dots, I was there's these verses about Jesus walking around and healing people, and he's our healer. And then understanding that Jesus cannot lie, then that meant that I could trust those words. But I still had this idea that I didn't have impressive enough faith. I was this is really good for mega church leaders or power Christians or people who are really holy. But I don't know that my faith is, impressive enough to manifest this kind of healing in my life. And God was just he said, Jenny, I said to him, Jesus, I really don't want to live my life with this disease. And he said, Jenny, then you don't have to. He said, this is for you. Yeah. He's this isn't just for them. This is for you. This is for the least of them. Because you think that it's for the great, holy, powerful. He's no, this is for the least of you. And this is for everybody. And so I received it. And I went back to the verse where he said, whatever you ask for in my name, yes, if you believe it and you receive it, then it's yours. And then I looked at the verse where it said that he cannot lie, and I was he literally is telling me something, and he's not lying. And I just thought that was, that in that moment, I was able to believe it. And so I just received the healing, and I just said, thank you, Jesus, that by your stripes that I have been healed already on the cross, and that you looked up at the Father and you said, it is finished. Yes. The healing was finished on the cross. It's complete. And I asked for it, and I received it, and he gave it to me. And in that moment, I knew that I had been healed in the Spirit. I knew it. I knew that I had been healed, and that disease was not in my body. And but I could still feel all the symptoms. I felt all 13 to 15 symptoms. I don't know how many there were, but there were a lot. And I could feel it in my body. But I just stood up, and I just started praising him. And I just started thanking him. And I was celebrating, and I was just celebrating the victory. I was just like, God, you are so good. You just healed me from an incurable disease, and you're just so good. And I just was praising him. And then I had this vision as I was praising him, and it was Jesus, and it was him in the temple, and he was throwing tables over in the temple. And I was like, this is weird because we're talking about healing. And I was like, so what does this have to do with healing? Why are you giving me this vision? And he said, Jennifer, your body is your temple. And he said, have you let thieves come into your temple? And I just said, you know what? I have. I've got all these demons running around rampant in my body, doing whatever they want to do to me. And he said, throw them out of your temple. And so I just said, get out. I was so mad. I could feel it. And I just started, the vision changed from him throwing the tables over to me throwing the tables over. And I said, Satan, you get out of my body right now, and you take every sickness, and you take every symptom with you. You are not welcome in my temple. And so all of a sudden, instantaneously, all 13 to 14, whatever symptoms stopped. And I'm talking every single solitary one stopped in its track. And I'm talking even the sores on my throat evaporated and disappeared in that moment. And that night, I ate a full meal. And then by the next day, I was eating 3 meals a day and snacks in between. I was picking out. I was eating Twizzlers. I was eating all this terrible stuff. I had lost 10 pounds, I think, in 5 days when I had all the symptoms. I gained it all back. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing because I had been wanting to lose weight, but I was just so happy that I could eat that I didn't care. I was eating 3 meals a day. And I went from not being able to sit down for to stand up for more than 5 minutes to I just didn't want to sit down. So I just was walking all over my house, just doing whatever I could. But there's more. So I'm sitting there and I'm having this encounter with the Lord where all the symptoms disappear just right there in an instant. And so I continue to worship and I just continue to praise him. And I just started I was just crying. I was laughing hysterically at the enemy. And I just feel this pain come into my back. Okay, I had just sent the demons out, and I feel this pain come into my back that was so paralyzing that it could have thrown me on the floor, it could have knocked me on the floor. And I could barely stand up because the pain was so bad. And I heard a voice, and it was the enemy, and he said, sit down. And I said, I'm not sitting down. I said, I'm not done praising Jesus. So I was like, I'll sit down when I'm ready to sit down. So I just keep praising him. And as soon as I said that, the pain left. And then it goes, and I keep praising, and I feel like an out-of-body experience. My body went so numb that I couldn't feel anything but the presence of God. And I even said out loud to Jesus, I was like, I could pinch myself right now, and I wouldn't feel it. So I reached down and I pinched myself, and I couldn't feel it. I couldn't even feel myself pinch myself. And so I go from, I'm continue praising, and then I just start dancing. So I went from not being able to stand up for more than 5 minutes to dancing wildly before the Lord. And and so then I'm done worshiping, and I lay down in my bed, and I feel these big arms just come and wrap around me. And he just held me, he just put his arms around me, and I had never felt anything like that before in all my life. Just that hug of that Jesus just hugging me and holding me in his arms. Beautiful. And I had asked him when I cried myself to sleep that night that if I could feel him hug me, and he came through for me, and he did it, and he held me in his arms, and I fell asleep. But when I woke up after that, the next day, I was full of joy, and I didn't have any fear. I didn't have any sadness. I wasn't worried. I just felt excited. I feel excited because I'm excited to see the story that Jesus has written for me. Because it doesn't end in a disease, and it doesn't end in death. And I'm just really excited. But, yeah, I haven't felt any symptoms ever since.
Woo! Yeah, baby. Man. You want an illustrated sermon? That's an illustrated sermon.